So each of us has a very unique life journey, and I'm going to share my life journey today. And it starts being the youngest of five children. And when you're the youngest of five children, you get lots of opportunity to watch the older ones make good choices or not so good choices. And you have the opportunity to do what we call vicarious learning, which means sit back, watch what they're doing, think about what's happening, and decide, hey, was that a choice I would like to make? Or is that a choice I want to avoid or maybe even do differently? So, my talk today is a lot about the journey of my life, but also talking about the choices you have. You're at a unique time in your life, whether you're finishing high school or you're in college or you've even started your career. You have all these amazing opportunities for choices about what you're going to do and where it's going to take you. So, starting back as a child, the youngest of five kids, loving family, wonderful parents, we always were challenged to explore and to learn and to do more. And I thrived in that environment. I loved the opportunity to learn, to discover, to explore, to think, to reason, to problem solve, discoveries that seemed unique to me. And so, interestingly, though, I found traditional school not to be so conducive to helping promote my creative thinking, my mental imagery skills, my out of the box thinking. And I found it more to be more rote and mundane. And so, my journey of structured school started with lots of running away from school. I ran away from school in first grade at Sunshine Elementary School in Springfield, Missouri. I ran away from school in second grade. I ran away from school in third grade. Many times I actually just got bored. And when the class got boring, my mind would go elsewhere and I'd be like, I just can't take it. And when the teacher wasn't looking and the back door is open, out I went, gone. Yes, my mother would typically bring me back, but I just needed that break from that environment that was not enough conducive enough for my creative thinking and my desire to actually be learning and reasoning, not just rote memorization. So, where my talk starts is actually going to be where my talk ends. My talk's going to end talking about how do we foster creativity? How do we foster that mindfulness power of decision making, understanding your options, making choices, it's looking for associations that somebody hasn't seen yet. That's where I'm starting in my journey, and that's where my journey is going to end. But after middle school was completed, into high school, then you start kind of choosing what fields of interest do you really feel fit for you. And I was very, very fascinated by the brain, medical, the mind. I thought I was going to become a pediatrician. So I went and worked in a pediatrician's office. And I found, boy, that's a lot of snotty noses. That's a lot of shots. That's a lot of sore throats and colicky babies. And you got like 15 minutes per kid max. And you're seeing 80 kids a day or something, crazy amount of kids. And that wasn't really the fit I was looking for. So I thought, what else could I do that's in the medical field? And I began to explore and wonder about, hey, what about emergency medicine? And so I went to work in a emergency department as a clerk in the ER and saw firsthand what would that be like. And I watched and I observed, again, repeating a lot of my childhood experiences, which are that vicarious learning with some experiential involvement as well. But I watched the physicians, I watched the nurses, I saw the lives they were living personally, I saw the work demands that they had as well. And I just kind of watched to experience and what my life felt like as the clerk to decide, hey, is this the life that I want to live as well for 5, 10, 20 years? And the answer came out, no, it's a little too intense. Sometimes you're working 2, 3 days in a row, you're missing your family. I'm very much a guy who wanted to be able to be a dad with a family, kids, and be heavily involved. So then at the age of 19, I got the opportunity to go to Central California. And I grew up in Missouri, very heart of the country kind of climate, hardy people, good caliber people. And California had new opportunities. And I went to work with some pioneers in the field of dyslexia. Her name was Patricia Conway Lindemood, and her husband was Charles Lindemood. And Patricia was my dad's older sister, so they were my aunt and uncle. And I was fascinated by the work they were doing. They were working to figure out, how do you actually help the brain build more strengths? How do you get even stronger skills in the areas of literacy, comprehension, language skills, written composition skills. They had all kinds of explorations and many different aspects of the brain because she was professionally trained as a speech pathologist and he was professionally trained as a linguist. So using speech pathology and linguistics, they blended their two knowledge bases together and they began to pioneer a medical developmental approach to helping build better language and literacy skills for children, for teenagers, and even through the adult age groups as well. So at the age of 19, I joined that journey. And it took me about a few months to convince them that I might actually be worthwhile to be a part of their clinic, because initially I just transferred from the ER in Missouri, at Columbia, Missouri, at Boone Hospital, to the ER in Arroyo Grande, California, which is Central Coast, small beach town area, California. So I was fully employed. I worked and volunteered in their clinic called San Luis Medical Clinic, and I began to learn what the Lindemuthes were pursuing in how to help empower the brain with better language, literacy, and other essential skills. And after a few months, they realized that I might be able to be a contribution to the team. And so they hired me to join the team and train me in one of their programs. And their first program was a lot like feeling like you were in the movie Karate Kid, where the sensei is making the kid wax his car. And the kid's like, I'm not here to wax your car. And he's like, wax on, wax off. And he's making him do these hand movements on his car. And it's like, the kid's like, this guy is crazy. He thinks I'm here to do chores for him. But what the student didn't know that the sensei instructor knew was he was building the lower level skills of motor movement, muscle strength, arm control, arm movements that all completely related to karate. So it really was actually karate training through a very unconventional, non-standard approach with starting with waxing a car. And that's exactly how it felt for me when I went to work for Patricia Conway Lindemuth. And here they begin to understand that if you study how a system builds, how does it develop, you can be able to see what are the key foundational components. And once you've laid that really strong foundation, then you can build to what's the next level skills. Okay, and then what's the second level skills? What's the third level skills? And you begin building the brain back up from the foundation up, because that's basically what the brain does for any skill it builds. It starts at very novice level abilities, and if you keep practicing it, you keep working on it, and you're doing the right kind of training, those skills get stronger and stronger. And so they understood that the foundation to literacy skills had nothing to do with letters. And it was a fascinating journey to work with them and see how this letter knowledge was actually not the foundation of reading and spelling. And unfortunately, many educational programs go straight to letters as if that's the starting point for reading and spelling. And to the most lay persons, it's like, yeah, of course it is. You can't read without letters. You can't spell without letters. But you may be fascinated to know that the number one predictor of your reading skills has nothing to do with the letters. It has everything to do with this left side of the brain over the ear here in that superior temporal auditory processing cortex. And it has everything to do with how well your brain is processing spoken language, sounds, and words. Let me be more clear. We know that the number one way to predict somebody's reading and spelling skills is to give them a test that actually requires them to hold on to words and manipulate them. So what we've been teaching pediatricians is when they're doing a well check with a child, we want the pediatrician to say, hey, I'm going to say a word. You say it back to me. Pediatrician says cat. The child says cat. He says, now I want you to say it again, but this time I want you to change it. Say cat, but don't say the k sound. Leave it off. The child who's not going to struggle to read and not going to struggle to spell will immediately just say at. And it's like effortless. It's like millisecond speed. Their brain did this new novel task they've never done before and put it right into practice with this new skill of taking a word, splitting it apart, figuring out where the k sound is, taking it away, and realizing that the last two sounds just say ah and t, and then coordinating all the motor programs of the mouth to say at. And so that's what we call phonological awareness. It's your ability to hold on to sounds, separate sounds, and manipulate sounds. It is the number one predictor of your literacy skills. And Patricia Lindemuth and her husband Charles were pioneers in discovering that connection to reading and spelling skills. They actually published a paper back in the 70s and actually built a test called the Lindemood Auditory Conceptualization Test. It's the first and only test, even today, that measures phonological processing plus phonological working memory. That means it goes from words with 2 sounds to words with 3 sounds to 4 sounds to 5 sounds to words with 2 syllables to 3 syllables to 4 syllables up to 5 syllable words. So they're measuring that whole level of systems of that speech processing skill called phonological awareness. So working with them and understanding how to think like a developmental scientist, because that's what she was trained as. She was a developmental speech language pathologist. That's the expert of understanding how does the brain build language skills, which precedes building reading skills, which precedes building spelling skills, which precedes building written composition skills, which precedes writing essay papers in college. All those have a developmental hierarchy. So after working for them for several years, I also knew I wanted to learn more, not just about just that aspect of language, but also the whole brain. How do all the parts develop? The motor system that's up here at the top, the mouth motor control system that's over here on the left side, the language comprehension system, which is back here behind your ear in some areas, the music and arithmetic system, which is over here on the right side of the brain. And so I began studying with a professional in the field called neuropsychology. Now, neuropsychology is not an old field. It is a very young and new field originating in the 70s or so, with a behavioral neurologist named Ken Heilman being one of the first behavioral neurologists to write a textbook geared towards helping train neuropsychologists. And the textbook is called, no shock, Clinical Neuropsychology. And he began to put together chapters that help neuropsychologists build that field of the brain and the behavior connections together. So neuropsychology really is a study of brain behavior connections across all skills. There's cognition, there's language, there's memory, there's the sensory motor systems, there's motor skills, there's attention, there's executive function. The neuropsychologist is trained in all of those skills, how they develop when you do pediatrics, how they build, and how they function looking at it from the adult perspective. And so fast forward from my work with the Lindemoods, I came to work at a medical clinic called the Morris Center. It was 3 years old. It was 1989 when I joined them, and they had opened in 1986. And they were run by a developmental behavioral pediatrician. Fascinating woman, Dr. Ann Alexander, who had a tremendous depth of knowledge well beyond the Lindemoods, because as a developmental behavioral pediatrician, she was trained in all of the systems that developed, not just the brain and not just language, but the metabolic systems, the nutrient systems, just all the body's functional chemistry, physiology, motor skills, everything was falling under her purview as a developmental behavioral pediatrician. But she didn't just train in that field. She also did 3 residencies. She did a residency in child psychiatry to understand more about how the brain might have psychiatric issues. She studied another residency in child psychology, which is that behavioral system that, social science of behavior. And then she studied another residency in pediatric neurology. That's more of the electrical firing, wiring systems of the brain itself. So Dr. Alexander had a tremendous breadth and depth of knowledge about the development of the brain, the body, and a child. And she was joined at the Morris Center Clinic by a Ph.D. speech pathologist who was an aphasiology speech pathologist, which means she studied language disorders that happened after you'd had an injury to the brain, like a stroke. Stroke means blood supply is cut off. Blood does not get up to the brain tissue. The brain tissue dies. It actually liquefies, and the brain creates more fluid to help fill the cavity, and you've lost some of your functions because some of the wiring for the brain is gone. They were also joined by a doctorate level occupational therapist. And I'll be very upfront and say at age 20 or so, when I joined him in 1989, I take that back, I'd be 23. She actually understood as an OT or an occupational therapist, all of the sensory motor systems. And I knew nothing about OT at that age, at 23. It sounded like job training for children. I thought, well, that's really not very legal. I don't think the labor laws allow you to put a child to work until age 15. But it wasn't about work. So it's not occupation meaning an actual job. It's occupation meaning all the skills you would need to perform activities of your morning routine, activities of the evening routine, activities of a work schedule. And so it's all of those parts together that were under the purview of the occupational therapist. And they have a whole developmental pyramid of the sensory motor system and how it builds. So joining the transdisciplinary team at the Moore Center in 1989, I became fascinated by learning even more about the brain and body and how it builds. And from 1989 until 1993, we began building together a more advanced program that was first pioneered by the Lindemoods called Auditory Discrimination in Depth. And that was really their attempt to actually go back in and rebuild those phonological skills and use stronger phonological processing from the neurology of the phonological processor, which means how the brain built typically is how their program was designed to take someone through the activities that would actually strengthen that system, and then use those stronger phonological skills, your ability to hold on to sounds, judge changes in sounds, to then build better letters and sound knowledge, build better ability to look at letters and sound them out for reading, build the ability to hold on to words and convert the sounds into letters for spelling. And so she had pioneered that neurology from a developmental hierarchy. And the Morris Center was taking that with my expertise in her ADD program, auditory discrimination in depth, not ADHD. That came later. But my expertise with Dr. Alexander, the developmental behavioral pediatrician, and with Dr. Helen Anderson, the Ph.D. speech pathologist aphasiologist, and with a doctorate level OT. And we began to work together to see, could we actually make this program even more effective? So from 1989 until 1993, we began modifying, restructuring, adding, changing a few components. And we saw really strong results that we published in a research study in 1991 in a journal called the Annals of Dyslexia. Now, this is what you do in the world of science. You say, hey, we've got an idea. We've tested it out. Here's a few sample kids we did it with. And these kids made anywhere from 1 to 4 grade levels of gain in some of their literacy skills. We think we're onto something. And using that 1991 published peer-reviewed paper, we then wrote a big grant. And when I say big grant, I mean like a 500 to 700 page grant with a team from Florida State and from the Morris Center. And we got funded. We got funded for what's called a randomized controlled trial. Now, the best way to understand what is a randomized controlled trial is to say you want science to tell you how effective is this treatment compared to other treatments? How reliable is the outcomes going to be of that treatment if it is more effective? And who does it actually be most likely to help? Who's most likely going to benefit from that treatment? And the only way to answer those questions is with a randomized controlled trial. It has scientific rigor. It has reproducibility. It has some support to understand that those results from that study are going to be likely to be occurring for any person of the population that that study was measuring. So our study was 8 to 10-year-olds who were severely dyslexic. And the findings from that study we knew would apply to any 8 to 10-year-old who also was severely dyslexic. But that wasn't enough. We did a pioneering study alongside that dyslexia remediation study. Our question was, hey, what if you could actually prevent dyslexia? What if you could actually stop the reading difficulties that are associated with dyslexia? And to explain that more, I better define what we know dyslexia is, because unfortunately in the media, there's more misinformation than accurate information about dyslexia. So let me give you the diagnostic criteria for dyslexia from a Bible that all licensed practitioners, which means healthcare providers who are actually licensed to provide dyslexia assessments, they are supposed to follow this Bible called the DSM-5. It's the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. It actually has all the data of what you need to meet to be diagnosed with dyslexia. And actually, there's only 3 criteria that you have to meet to be diagnosed with dyslexia. One is there a deficit in your reading accuracy? Second one is there a deficit in your reading speed? And the third one is, do you have any difficulties with reading comprehension? If you have reading comprehension problems, you could be diagnosed with dyslexia. If you have reading speed problems, that would be enough to diagnose you with dyslexia. If you have reading accuracy problems, that as well could be enough to diagnose you with dyslexia. You can have one of the three, two of the three, or you can have all three. Any of those then meets the criteria for the diagnosis of dyslexia. So from that background and from that knowledge of what dyslexia is, we then embarked on another study that was a prevention of the phonological processing difficulties that we know is the number one predictor of your reading skills. And that's that activity of, can you say cat without the k sound? Or another example be, we'd say flame, the child would say flame, we'd say now say flame, don't say oh. And the child, teen, or adult who's got strong phonological skills will immediately just say fame. Or if you say baseball, they say baseball, you say now say baseball, don't say base. And they go ball, just like that. That's the person who has really strong phonological processing. But let me throw out a caveat I'll come back to. Just because you have phonological processing doesn't mean you're using it accurately and efficiently with reading and spelling. That's another step in development. So it's not just enough to have it, you also have to know how to apply it, how to use it. That's where systematic, explicit, structured training comes into play to help build those skills. So from that field of dyslexia, we did a 5-year study on identifying 5-year-olds who are most at risk for being diagnosed with dyslexia by age 9. They could not say cat without the k sound. They could not say flame without the ol sound. They struggled tremendously with that skill set. And so they were then most likely to be diagnosed dyslexic by age 9. We ran those 2 studies in parallel, one happening in Tallahassee, one happening in Gainesville, Florida, and those studies had tremendous findings. With the remediation study of the 8 to 10-year-olds, when I said they were severely dyslexic, that means that 95% of kids their age read better than they did. Their reading skills were in the bottom 5%. And the fascination was, okay, could we change that? And the answer was, yes, we can. And not just a small amount, but a very large change. And we did it in only 8 weeks because we did 2 sessions a day, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. And that helped us build these skills for these children. So they went from the 5th percentile to the 45th percentile. And that means they're solidly in the average range. They're solidly on grade level with those skills of being able to sound out words at the 45th percentile. Now, it's not just enough to change somebody's skills and say, oh, we've done it. We've, strengthened the weaker skills. The next part of the question is, yeah, but what happens 1 year later when you're no longer doing intervention? What happens 2 years later? Are the skills still there? Are they getting weaker? Are they getting stronger? And we studied that as well. And we answered the question. The answer was, yes, they're stronger at 1 year later and stronger at 2 years later. So we showed for the first time ever in that study that you could dramatically strengthen a tremendously weaker skill that was leading to lots of struggles in school, which is you were not very good at sounding out words to read or to sound out words to spell. And hence you probably had a diagnosis of dyslexia, which can also be called a specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. Let's jump back to the 5-year-olds, which is particularly interesting to me because one thing I didn't tell you at the start of my talk is I'm dyslexic. At age 5, I got prevention. Because of the pioneering work of the Lindemuths, my mother knew that one of my brothers struggled and he had gotten remediation to close the gap. And she decided not to wait and see if I was going to struggle. So at age 5, I got put through the same dyslexia remediation program, but as a prevention, taking those phonological skills and making them stronger before I fell behind. So it was only ironic that I was the person who was training the teachers, training the instructors in a big multi-million-dollar project to see, could we use a randomized controlled trial design and prevent these reading problems in 5-year-olds? And I'm really happy to tell you the answer is yes. Yes, we can prevent those reading problems. And the study we published back in 1998, 1999 was the final publication. And we did another publication in 2001 on both of these studies. We showed that you could take children who came to school in the bottom 10% on those pre-literacy skills at age 5, and we could get more than 91% of them passing kindergarten and first grade. If you did nothing, or if you did a little bit of explicit systematic phonics instruction, that means you don't start at the speech processor, you start at letters. and you're going to what does PH say? What does AI say? You're doing word families, but it's all about the letter sound. You're starting at a level higher and trying to go down to the speech processor. That, or the third thing they would do is just do a little extra one-on-one time of whatever the teacher was doing. And we found that those three issues, no treatment or the phonics-based instruction, that's systematic, explicit, structured phonics, it's a current buzzword here in the mid-2020s, that, that's the answer, that's the goal key. But our study showed it's actually not when you're trying to do prevention. And we also found that doing a little extra one-on-one time was not enough either, because those three groups had the same outcomes. 25 to 40% of those kids will not pass kindergarten and first grade. So all the work the Morris Center was doing was trying to figure out what's the most effective way to help empower either kids who already have fallen behind, or before kids fall behind, can you prevent? And then I left the Morris Center Clinic from a primary standpoint. I stayed involved in the background, but I then joined another scientific group called the Brain Rehabilitation Research Center of Excellence. Ironically, it was led by another pioneering speech pathologist named Dr. Leslie Gonzalez-Rothy. And Dr. Gonzalez-Rothy really understood that we could use a transdisciplinary team approach to regain skills after brain damage called stroke. I was recruited to join their team to work on the literacy aspect of things. And for 10 years, I pursued my passion of reasoning, problem solving, novel thinking, to figure out, could we take that dyslexia intervention, which today is called the Now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling program. It's still offered at the Morris Center clinics around the US and in the Caribbean, in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. Those are, we have the Morris Center clinics. And we then began to see, could it actually help rebuild skills after brain damage? And we spent 10 years measuring that use of those skills. And we found that, yeah, we're about 70% successful in adults who've had stroke rebuilding functional literacy skills. And it may not seem like a big deal to you, but imagine this. There are 800,000 people a year on average in the US who have a stroke. From that, there are about 40 to 50,000 people every year, meaning new, 40 to 50,000 new people who've lost their reading skills or lost their spelling skills because of the stroke. And some of these folks are 20. Some of them are 30, 40, 50, 60. Stroke can happen at any decade of life. It's not just a geriatric issue or a medical condition. So for some folks, if you're 30 and you lost your reading skills, that can have a huge impact on your ability to pursue your dreams, pursue your goals, even hold a job. So it has tremendous importance that we can rebuild those skills. And I'm happy to tell you that we built some science that says, yes, we can. We can use that same phonological awareness training program, which today is called Now Foundations for Speech, Language, Reading, and Spelling, and rebuild reading skills and phonological processing skills and spelling skills, even with a person who's had a brain damage. So as I was progressing along in my career, I've gone from the kid who used to run away from school to the kid who embraced some aspects of school to the kid who chose to be a young man in a Ph.D. program at the University of Florida, getting trained in a Ph.D. in neuropsychology, to then becoming a clinical research scientist for 10 years. And then I was at a crossroads. Working so many hours a week, I was missing some time with my family. So I had to make a choice. Do I keep going down the stroke rehab path, or do I go and focus on the Morris Center clinics? And I realized that I had trained enough of my colleagues in our approach to do stroke rehab that research was going to continue and that clinical service was going to continue as well. So I chose to focus on the Morris Center clinics. And I bought the company in 2008. And I say clinics today, but back then there was just one. The clinic started in Gainesville, Florida, just down the road from the University of Florida. But in 2011, I opened a second Morris Center clinic in Ocala, Florida. And in 2016, I opened a third clinic in the Caribbean, in the Trinidad and Tobago, called the Morris Center Trinidad and Tobago. And in 2021, I opened another clinic in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, outside of Jacksonville, and began building more access to these really high-powered transdisciplinary teams who have experts in clinical psychology, neuropsychology, experts in speech language pathology, experts at occupational therapy, those motor skills, visual motor skills, and they're cross-trained in how to work together. But we realized early on that was probably not going to be enough. And so in 2016, after having done about 8 years of work in the Moore Center Clinic, we would do some work by, back then it was dial-up internet. If you can imagine, really low bandwidth and very tremendous difficulty of doing video like we're doing today. We would do video sessions starting as early as 2008 and trying to see, can we reach folks who couldn't come to a Moore Center Clinic? That was very successful. And so in 2016, I opened a new company. 2013, I opened a new company, and that was called Now Programs. And nowprograms.com is an ed tech where we're using webcams person to person all over the world to deliver some of these scientifically tested and proven programs to build better skills and better abilities. But you don't have to come to a Moore Center Clinic. We bring the instructor to you. And so that company has grown over 100 staff, and they're serving children, teens, and adults worldwide. And the goal there was, can we make the science more accessible? It's great that we've pioneered this. We've figured it out. We've got all these skills and abilities, but the question is, can everybody access it? And that's where that ed tech platform comes into play. And I'm happy to say it's been extremely successful. We've done contracts with schools where we're pushing in the special ed services for schools, closing the gaps in literacy skills for kids, and then watching them take off and soar. And many of them exit any special support services. They call it in the UK student support services, or SEND services. In the US, we call them special ed services. And those were services designed to accommodate, compensate, or work around the deficit. But today we know we can do far better than that. We can not just work around it. We don't have to just compensate for the reading problems, or we don't have to, accommodate the reading problems with, technology devices. We actually can take weaker reading skills and make them stronger for any person anywhere in the world. So EdTech plus the Moore Center are two platforms that I took from my background and worked towards building and making available. But we initially had done something in 1999. When we first published those studies on preventing reading problems and closing the gaps for 8 to 10-year-olds, our first thought was, hey, let's get this to public schools. And so we opened the nation's very first free public charter school for dyslexia called the Einstein School. Now, the Einstein School is named after Albert Einstein to help kids know that dyslexia has nothing to do with IQ. Now, there's lots of debate about whether or not Einstein had dyslexia. We're not going to tackle that question today, but just we all will agree that he was a very smart man. And so we wanted the kids coming to that school to know that we knew that these kids have great intelligence, but we knew that we need to unlock those struggles they're having with reading skills or spelling skills or writing skills. So we built the Einstein School to show the public school system it's not about the teacher's knowledge. That's not enough. It's not about how much money you have. That's not enough. It's the combination of teacher knowledge plus the proper financing plus programs that have been tested and proven to be highly effective. And the program gives you not just the ingredients, but you've got the ingredients on what needs to be happening, and you have the recipe on what to do and how to do it and when to do it and how much. And it's the ingredients and the recipe together that help our schools be highly successful. And we've built a working model, and it's been running since 1999, showing that even with a lower budget, because a charter school gets a lower budget than a regular public school, but yet it is a public school, so it's free. There's no tuition. And ours is actually a nonprofit as well. So the Einstein School in Gainesville, Florida, it's the only one we have. We don't have any Einstein School anyplace else except for Gainesville, Florida. It actually is a nonprofit helping about 120 kids a year build those literacy skills. And then we needed to take this one step further. So in 2024, about 2 months ago, we launched our very first mobile device app. And this one is only geared for 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. We want to first empower literacy across the globe for any age kid, for any location of a child age 4, 5, and 6. So we want to empower literacy across the globe for 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And we're going to use apps to do it. And so our first app is called Lip Letter Land. It's just 2 words. We combine the words lip letter together because that's actually what the brain does. The brain uses knowledge about your lips and the sounds and the visual and the letters. And that's how it begins to build those early literacy skills and land, because we have these fun adventures for 4, 5, and 6-year-olds to play in lip letter land that begins to wire the neurology of that early speech language processor that is the foundation for stronger literacy skills. So lip letter land is our first foray into ed tech apps. That means mobile device technology. Right now it's on iOS, Apple. Very shortly it'll be coming out in Android as well. And through the Android and Apple platforms of phones or tablets, we're going to continue to build more and more apps that make more and more powerful literacy programs available to students in public schools, private schools, even before they get to school if they're 4 years old, and strengthen those literacy skills. So these are the choices that I made across my journey. I watched vicariously with my mentors, Dr. Alan Alexander, Dr. Ken Heilman, who passed away just recently, was a pioneer in behavioral neurology, wrote the first textbook on clinical neuropsychology, and was also one of my mentors on my dissertation committee, and the late Patricia Conway Lindemood. Watching your mentors, learning from your mentors, and vicariously taking in and learning as much as you can from them guided me on my journey to make my choices. And this is where I am today. I now own 4 companies and a nonprofit. We're about to open more of the More Center clinics. We're about to expand the nowprograms.com online edtech company, and we're about to start bringing to you globally more and more electronic apps that will actually help facilitate in a very systematic, with high effectiveness learning experiences, because we know the human brain has tremendous learning potential. So let me wrap up my journey by saying one thing I want you to know about your journey is the human brain has 100 billion brain cells on average, and you have about 100 trillion connections. And the intelligence of what you build is not how many cells you have, it's the wiring that you build. We call that experience-dependent neuroplasticity. It means the more experiences you engage in, the more chance the brain has for making new wiring and building new skills. So go out there, find your passion, find what you want to do, explore these opportunities, experience being a clerk in a pediatric office like I did, or a clerk in ER like I did, and realizing those are not the careers I want, but get out there, get exposure, get experience, get practice, and chart the course that you want to take. Because my course is an example of learning from others and making my own choices, and then doing what I can to help empower others. So I wish you well on your journey to empower others. Thank you for the time you took to listen and learn about my journey to help us bring one thing in place, and that is global literacy.